everybody. My name's Danielle, and I work here at Westland Gallery. And joining me today for this virtual artist talk is Peter Reid, or Peter John Reid, as he goes by with his artwork. And this talk is part of his exhibition, which is ongoing right now at Westland Gallery with Andrew Sucra, and it continues until the 17th of July, if there's anyone who hasn't been by to see it yet and would like to come and see the show. I'm going to give a little preface because we have been having, as I mentioned, some technical difficulties involving Peter's rural internet connection. So his video might freeze a little bit, but we're just gonna let it freeze and hopefully it will come back in. If anyone can see the waving hands in the one video screen, that is Peter's partner, Bonnie, and I believe their grandkids. Is that right, Peter?
Yes, that's correct.
That's great. So we're going to chat with Peter about his career, and then I'm going to give a video tour of the show at the end so everyone can see the work after having learned from Peter and heard about his technique. So again, thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you, Peter, for making some time to talk with us tonight. All right, well, we'll give this a go. If it works, it works, and if not, I'll give you guys a little presentation about Peter. So, Peter, you were born in England and then moved to Canada when you were fairly young, growing up north of Toronto. And for the past 30 years, you've lived in a beautiful Grey County here in Ontario on a wooded 4-acre property. So what attracted you after having, lived in England, lived in North Toronto as it moved from kind of a rural environment into more urban? What attracted you to this current home, this current property you've been on for so long?
When I first bought a place up here, I was living in downtown Toronto in the Annex area. And it was very much like winning the lottery when I loved living downtown Toronto. It was nice being there, close to everything. But it was like winning the lottery when we moved up here, and especially the escarpment and what's around, like the wilderness. And someone recently said, "What's all that noise?" And I said, "That's birds." And they were just so used to the traffic or something like that.
Sounds beautiful, especially knowing you to be, a landscape painter and so inspired by nature. I'm sure it's amazing to be completely immersed in that. So you have this gorgeous property, and I think we're seeing a little smidgen of your studio right now. As we were chatting before, you declared it the neat side of the studio. But can you tell us a bit about your setup, your studio setup?
It's an exterior to the home. It has in-floor heating, air conditioning, sink, bathroom. It's about 30 by 28 feet. And it's amazing how big you can build it and then think, wow, it'd be nice to have more room. But this is what we got, and it is a wonderful space to work in.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, every artist describes it that way. I mean, whatever amount of space you give yourself, it's gonna fill up. Doesn't matter how big. So you were always creative as a child, you've told me, and you went to a arts high school and then on to OCA, OCAD-U now. Can you tell me a bit about your experience growing up, high school art and university art education?
Well, it started long before high school. It was just public school. I think we had art on Fridays every week, and it was just the highlight of my week. And my parents often sent me to summer camp, like an art camp, and then it was just art all the way through. And the one thing I just like to tell people is that I didn't really learn to paint in school. I learned to paint from other artists taking courses and whatnot, and actually just putting paintbrush to paint. it's something that art college is wonderful, but it's nothing like the array of teachers that you can come in contact with throughout all Ontario and even outside of Ontario. Hard to believe there's good teachers outside of Ontario, but there are.
Yeah, there's so you're right. And learning from other artists and taking workshops is a way a lot of artists choose to learn, either in addition to like a formal post secondary education, or as their only way of learning, and self-taught artists as well. I mean, we work with very well established self-taught artists. Um, I'm not surprised to hear then that you've had such a good experience with workshops and learning from other established artists, to know that you are also interested in teaching and you offer classes and workshops now as part of your career as well.
Well, it's really nice to be able to share what I've learned. And even when you are teaching, you can still learn quite a bit from the students that you're teaching, even if it's how you're doing something wrong, trying to pass it on.
Pass on the lesson.
Yes.
So you paint, every day now, but through a lot of your career, you were in the commercial art world, especially while you were raising children. What did you do?
I'm an industrial designer. And so initially I worked in the transit industry, working on streetcars and subways and sky trains and that sort of thing. And started my own company doing industrial design. And then just graphic work just seems to be a lot more of it out there, and it just creeped in. And so I worked for a number of years as a graphic designer. And really what saved me there was the computer, because I definitely could not have stood the drudgery involved in the old way of doing graphic arts. I hate to date myself, but using Electroset and waxers and stat cameras, and the computer's so much nicer.
You prefer the computer. It's interesting because for some people, the shift to digital pushed them out of a certain career. And so for some, it made it accessible. So that's interesting.
He started in the print industry as well, and he did it the old-fashioned way where you're grabbing type from cases
Yeah.
and laying an E, you grab an L and whatnot. And he ended up, then he went to hot type, and then he went to a computer at the end of his career. So it was interesting. He went through a full range of in his business.
Yeah, changes with the times, that's for sure. Do you think that that experience working, as a industrial designer and then as a graphic designer, has that informed your artistic practice in any way?
Most skills are transferable some way or another. It's been a great help, especially in the marketing of my work, but it's also allowed me I primarily paint from photos. And so it's made photo management and even manipulating a photo, combining it just really it's almost any skill set can become useful in any skill. Like a lot of it is transferable.
Absolutely. Photo management. I like that. So many landscape painters that do work from photographs will tell you that they have just thousands of reference images on their computers and hard drives. It's hard to resist taking another picture and another picture when you find the landscape so inspiring.
Well, especially with how good the cameras are in our phones now. It's getting to the point where I rarely bother taking the camera out because the phone is so handy, and especially the newer ones, take great pictures.
They really do. They really do. While you were commercial artists, you did still nurture your artistic, more traditional artistic side. But when did you make the move into kind of painting full time?
It was, I started cutting back. I at one point switched to working for a company, and I started working 4 days a week, and then I dropped to 3 days a week. And I was teaching and painting in between that, and it just got to be the point where I was working all the time, and something had to give, and it was hard to let go a full-time job where you had a medical plan. I think it made Bonnie a little nervous to leave that medical plan behind, and all the benefit and the guaranteed paycheck, but it's been nothing but good. And I guess you go by that: nothing gained, nothing, well, no, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Get that right. So
Absolutely.
it has been great.
That's fantastic. So what, you paint primarily in acrylics, right? And primarily landscape painting. Was that always the case?
I've dabbled in cold wax, oil painting, and watercolor. I actually started most of my work was in watercolor, and it's just the flexibility and the speed. Like oil is a beautiful medium to work with, but oh so slow, and waiting for things. I'm not very patient waiting for things to dry. And watercolor always involved the framing, which I just hate framing. Like, I mean, you put together a frame and there's that little bit of dust in there, or it gets scratched, or if one of my canvases gets scratched, I know this guy that will fix it for me.
Absolutely. I
So yeah,
admire Al and Meredith, our framers, for their patience and diligence putting frames together. So you're absolutely right. You get it all assembled, and there's like one little fleck in there that has to come all apart. Now, Peter, you also founded a painting group called Studio 20, correct?
that's correct.
And what was your kind of initial vision for that program, or how did it first start? And what has it evolved into over the years?
Well, initially it was someone asked me to teach them to paint, and Mark Merritt. At the time, I wasn't teaching, and just because you know how to do something, you know how to teach. And so I said, why don't you just come paint with me? And so we had a couple of people came together, and we used to meet. And at the time, we referred to the group as the Dollaramas, because everyone was painting on dollar store canvases. And it just got to the point where there were too many to meet. I didn't have this studio at that time, and the house wasn't large enough. And so we moved into the Timothy Christian School in Owen Sound. Only were using half of their school, and they had the old section of the school, and they had these beautiful old classrooms that with the 14-foot ceilings and chalkboards. And so we took that off, and we were in, it was room 20, and it was a previous founding member was Wendy Bashu, and she came up with Studio 20.
Love it.
And when I did a logo for it, I put two X's, thinking Roman numeral for 20, but everyone seemed to think it was like we were doing something. So the group initially was all about learning to paint, and then just gradually over time at work, usually 1 to 2 projects a year. And so I think since we've been doing that, we've raised over $25,000 for local we try to keep it local charities, and we try to do different ones each year. So it's actually been a tough time because over COVID we haven't been able to meet, although we did just finish doing
Oh, he'll probably pop back in. This was happening a little bit before we opened up to everyone, so we're having some trouble with Peter's internet. But I'll just expand a little bit and summarize that, because he was breaking up a little bit. But their group Studio 20 that Peter runs, a group of artists, began with kind of just the idea of learning to paint. I loved hearing that they were called the Dollaramas before, because they were painting on dollar store canvases. And it has evolved into kind of a charitable endeavor as well, a group that meets and paints, but also runs events for local charity. And hopefully we'll get Peter back on here because I'd love to ask him a couple of questions about the charities that they've chosen to support recently. We have a couple of questions about color mixing, and we're definitely going to talk about that with Peter because he is also the author of a book which we have available here in the gallery, and I will grab a copy of that to show to everyone. There we go. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Fantastic. So I wanted to ask, what are some of the charities that you've chosen to support with your group?
One that most people would know would be Ronald McDonald House. We've done for the REACH program, for the homeless, for the women. I think we've done for the women's shelter twice. We have a piece in the cancer ward in the hospital, the food bank. There's more, but the gray matter isn't quite as good as it used to be. But it's
Well,
usually I leave it up to one of the members to suggest a charity. What do you call it? The Olympics for not the big Special Needs Olympics. I'm not getting the name right, but yeah.
Fantastic. Well, it's amazing to use art to raise funds for some important causes. So there's some questions in the chat, Peter, about color mixing. So this is Peter's book here, and these are available in the gallery during his exhibition. We have a few copies still, so if you're interested, it's a great resource. I would suggest coming in and taking a look and purchasing a copy if you are interested in adding color mixing or expanding on your knowledge of color mixing in your practice. So the question here, Peter, is do you use a primary color palette and do you mix your colors? So can you talk a bit about color mixing in your practice? Maybe how you started, like what your palette was when you kind of started, if it's changed at all, what you might recommend for a beginning artist? That'd be great.
Initially, I would have started with all the colors, like not you buy a color and you don't really understand it, because I certainly wasn't taught color in college. You think the amount of color education I've had, it was pretty poor what I came out with, the knowledge. But what I use now is called a split primary palette, which is two of each primary, a warm and a cool yellow, a warm and a cool blue, a warm and a cool red. And then I do use the addition of yellow ochre and burnt sienna. And they're just very convenient colors to have. So yes, I mix everything. And with that palette, partly why I choose that palette is I have yet to come across a color I could not mix. And so it's being part of Scottish ancestry, you have to buy less color. You can buy larger sizes, which is cheaper, but it's also very good if you're traveling with it, you need to take less with you. Mm-hmm. And it's like you could use a thesaurus if you were a writer all the time and look up interesting words, but having a really good color vocabulary is great for a painting. One of the things I find when people buy a pre-mixed color, they're going to overuse it rather than keep tweaking it one way or the other. And even they worry, well, I can't mix enough of the same color. Well, mixing enough of the same color is not necessarily a good thing. You want that color to vary throughout the painting. You don't want to have it consistent throughout.
Absolutely. That subtle change adds so much depth to the piece. Color mixing is really important and kind of sometimes a topic that's overlooked a little bit. Can you talk about why it might be important for an artist who's starting out to start with a more minimal palette? Because I think sometimes people are attracted to those huge packs of every color of the rainbow in the art store.
Well, like it's frustrating when you first start, especially because I've taught some very novice people that even the idea of how you mix green with blue and yellow was, they just never come across that. But it's important that you start off with a good basic palette, and you never have to change that. and you just learn more and more colors. It's sort of like not if you were a writer going to the store and buying certain words, you want to buy the key colors that allows you to mix anything you want. It's the two blues that I use, which are ultramarine and phthalo blue. With those two blues and white, you can mix every other single blue out there. But if you buy cobalt blue, you can't mix a phthalo blue. The colors I'm using are, other than burnt sienna and yellow ochre, they're colors that you can't really mix. You can get the warm red, you can sort of mix with if you were really minimalistic, you would just use the cyan, the magenta, and the light yellow. Those would be the only three. But the addition of the secondary primaries, not the secondary colors, but the secondary primaries, makes it a little bit easier. And I'm all about making it easy.
Right. So secondary colors versus secondary primaries, those there. So your secondary color, if you've got red and yellow, your secondary color is the orange. But you're saying you like to have two yellows, one that's warm, one that's cool, and two reds, one that's warm, one that's cool.
And really the secondary primary, or the second primary that I'm using, is mixable. Like the warm red that most people think of as a primary, you can just add a little bit of yellow to the magenta and you would get that warm red. Same with the yellow deep. You can add a little bit of red to that and get the yellow deep to the light yellow. But the two blues are, well, the phthalo blue you can't mix. Doesn't matter what you've got. And the ultramarine blue is tricky to mix from using the phthalo blue.
We have a question. What are the specific reds and yellows that you use?
Each one has the two blues. It's ultramarine blue. Don't worry about whether it's French ultramarine. The only difference is how they're made. They come out exactly the same. Phthalo blue, and it should be phthalo blue green shade, not the red shade. You can add a little bit of red to get it red shade. A yellow light, and so when I say yellow light, you can use bismuth yellow, Hansa yellow, cad yellow. They're all different price and some have slightly different properties. One that I prefer the most is bismuth yellow light, but it's $40 versus $10 for a Hansa yellow light. And Hansa yellow light's going to mix very similar. I think you're trying to get me to talk about the whole book, and no one's going to buy my book now.
No, not trying to.
So the yellow light and a yellow deep, both of those are available in cadmium, bismuth, aerolite. There's a number of them, and it's about learning the hue more than the actual name of the color. In the book, I talk about aerolite yellow and how many different names there are for the same pigment.
Right.
Different paint companies just say, oh, we're going to call, I was going to start a paint company and I was going to call, this is Peter Yellow and this is Reid Red and this is, and call it all after myself, which is sort of like Winsor Newton when they have Winsor Blue, and Winsor Blue is just phthalo blue green shade. And some of the times all these different names just confuse an already confused audience. But so the burnt sienna is a color you need to watch when you're buying it, because it's one color that varies amazingly through manufacturer to manufacturer. Winsor Newton is very orange. Reid is very red, almost not even like burnt sienna. But mostly I try to use Tri-Art paints, which it's a Canadian manufacturer. And it's not that it's better, it's just that it's Canadian, and I prefer to buy Canadian.
Absolutely.
Pretty much all the big companies are very compatible as far as quality goes.
Right.
They should support Canadian galleries too, especially those ones in London.
Oh, yeah, I agree. And Canadian artists. Well, that was great, Peter. I love the idea of naming an entire line of paints after yourself. I think that's fantastic. Um, yeah, this is like a wonderfully made book. I would definitely recommend it for anyone. You dive into some interesting topics as well, not just educational, but kind of, you know, where do pigments come from a little bit, you touch on, and things like that. I haven't read the entire thing yet, but it seems like a great resource, so I would recommend it. And you mentioned a little bit that the writing of that book kind of evolved out of this Studio 20 group. The way that you were, you know, in the moment, explaining things, helping artists out with painting, kind of helped you to articulate the knowledge that you had and kind of be able to put it into book form.
Very much so. It's Studio 20 started the teaching, and it's really the teaching individual classes that I used to have handouts, and the handouts were becoming quite cumbersome. So I wrote the first book. There's actually 3 books now, and each time I teach a class, they're saying, well, they really didn't understand that. I should maybe try explain that a different way. And so the latest book really is the latest explanations. But as soon as you go to press, you think, wow, I could have put that in there, or I think this would be a better way. So I'm looking for that book that just evolves as, or maybe the digital books will come to the point where you publish a different version of it every 3rd day or something.
Yeah.
The first book is out of print right now, and I'm thinking of moving that into a digital format. So it's just whether or not I update it for that digital format or not.
What are the
It takes
3
a lot of
titles?
effort. How to paint with acrylics, acrylic techniques, and the latest mixing color.
Very cool. And did you do the graphic design work for it? Like, did you assemble the pages yourself?
I did everything with the assistance of Bonnie Gardner, my wife, and one of her main jobs is to convert it from whatever it is I speak to English. And over time, she's learned the way I phrase things and just scratches her head. And
she can be your translator onto paper. Bonnie's an artist as well, right?
That is correct. She, very different artist than myself. She's quirky, has a great eye for seeing composition, and is much looser than I'm quite prim and proper.
Yeah, people are enjoying that a lot, though, Peter. I mean, these scenes are beautiful, and they take you right there. It's feels like a summer vacation in the gallery right now. What's the experience being married to another artist? Do you critique each other's work, or you try not to? Bonnie's commenting, "Don't believe everything he says" in the chat. LOL. But how do you support each other's creative process?
Well, one of the biggest things we both do is wave each other out of the picture. We came back from a vacation and we thought, there's one shot of us. And we're always like wherever you go, you're looking for photos. So, yeah. When we're on a hike, she said, you should take, like, because some things don't interest her, but she says, you should take that. That would be a good painting. And I always listen. And it's also because when you paint, you often live and breathe that. So it's very helpful having a partner who is also interested in it. She might not be quite as interested in rocks as I am, but it's still the whole concept of color and composition and being inspired by just a group of trees, or her favorite are wonky buildings. And it's you know, I can see occasionally I'm off on a tour by myself and I'll see some decrepit old boater and I think that's something she'll want to paint.
Yeah,
and so we
snap a picture for her.
And she's taken a lot of great photos that I've painted. So it's great to have a partner that is also interested in art.
Absolutely. And like community amongst artists is so important. And I think now you have artists come out to your studio to paint. Like, is that Studio 20 now on location at your residence?
Yes, we were renting in the school, and when we built this studio, a lot of the members are older, and we were on the second floor of an old school with, I think it was 100 steps between floors, and
Oh my God.
so a lot of people were finding that arduous. And the having this studio space, it was great because it's large enough. I think we can comfortably fit non-COVID times about 18 people in here. Class, we're actually running the first class this weekend on color mixing.
Amazing.
Um, what is, and we're limited to much fewer people, but it's been a tough run for everyone, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, we're getting back to things though, and people are happy even in those small crowds to just be able to get out and do something again. We've been able to have some outdoor painting demos, and Andrew, who you're showing with, is coming on Saturday to do some painting outside. And we're able to gather a small crowd for that, and it's a good feeling. We're getting back to safely doing some things together, so it's wonderful. I did want to ask you, Peter, because in your bio, it mentions that you dabble a tiny bit in some three-dimensional work, but you do that just for yourself. And I think that that's wonderful because, you know, when you're painting and showing and selling, you can start to be kind of motivated or make decisions based on your clientele. And I think it's beautiful to have like just a purely creative process that's just for yourself as well. Can you talk about that a bit?
Well, it was years ago, I saw a TV special on Alex Colville, and I was watching this and I thought, my God, this man, he paints every morning and then he does whatever he wants in the afternoon. And so that's sort of what I've modeled my later life in, is I paint every morning. And then in the afternoon, I have a full wood shop, and I'll go down there and I've got some torches for metal work, and it's just right now I can't really show you. It's raining outside here, but we have an old tree trunk outside that I'm in the middle of carving with chainsaws,
Wow.
and that it's in a lot of time. I just finished a whole series of sort of found objects sculptures that my wife envisioned, Bonnie, and I finished building those. And so she is a master of finding stuff by the side of the road and having the imagination to do something with. So it's I've never really liked the term artist very much. I've always liked the term maker. I get as much pleasure out of making a table as I do as painting a painting. It's just the painting is more profitable.
Yeah, I do think making things is important for almost everybody, even beyond people who consider themselves to be an artist or be creative. There's something so satisfying about taking some materials and creating something with your own hands. I think it's good for the soul. We have a couple comments here. Sierra and Sophia, I think those are your granddaughters, correct?
Yeah,
Say that your paintings are beautiful because they are so detailed, and I would have to agree. We have a question: how much water do you feel can be mixed with acrylics? This is a great question because your work has a beautiful, I don't know, quality to the colors. Like the colors have a beautiful substance to them, which can sometimes kind of be lost a bit with too much water in acrylics. So could you talk a little bit about that?
okay, I might just
Don't give your whole book away.
whatever
Just give us a little teaser.
go, contrary to what you said, I have a YouTube video on that people can watch for free.
Perfect.
On there is no too much water. You can use 95% water. It's all about getting what it is that you want to appear. There's an awful lot of, I've been to manufacturer demos, and they're saying, don't use water, use medium. Partly that's because they're selling medium and you can get water for free. But then they go ahead later during their demo and say, add water here. Using water in acrylics is key to getting the effect that you want. The painting I was working on today, I had probably 95% water. A lot of times I'll put paint on the canvas and then I'll get a clean wet brush and I'll thin that down. And some of that's coming from my watercolor background. But one of the things, when you watch the YouTube video, you'll see that even when acrylic is watered way, way down, the adhesion is still fantastic. And some people say, well, I'm nervous about that. If you were nervous about it, you can always top coat the whole painting with a clear medium, and that pigment is locked into that canvas. So there's no fear. Use whatever amount of water works.
Fascinating. I haven't painted much since university, so I'm by no means an expert on painting or acrylic painting. But if anyone's curious in this topic more, definitely watch Peter's video and come and take a look at his work in person, because there's a beautiful consistency to the paint. So thank you for sharing that. So we have some other questions. Where can they find information about your classes? I imagine on your website.
That's correct.
I saw there's a whole page on his website about classes. And we're getting back into those, right?
Yes, I did one a couple weeks ago, or a week ago. And like I say, the first one at the studio here starts Friday. What day is it? Thursday?
It's Wednesday.
Today's Wednesday. Yeah, it starts on Friday.
Okay, fantastic.
And that'd be great. I love teaching here.
Chris says that he'd love to see some of those sculptures, and I agree. And he asks, is there an umbrella philosophy or an idea that you wish to invoke with your work?
One of the things I talked on before is I like the term maker. Is I think people get too caught up in whether it's art or having a style. Don't worry about style. Don't worry about whether it's art. Just practice. It's getting the skill that's most important to create the vision that you have. And the more you paint, the better you get. And a common rule of thumb in painting is you need to do about 300 paintings before you know what you're doing. And it's definitely, the more I paint, the better I get at it, and the freer it is you are, because you're not thinking, oh, I don't want to do water, or I don't want to do rocks because I don't know how. And you need to think like Maud Lewis. She never did advance too far, but boy, she never stopped painting. Do it for the love.
Wise advice. You touched a bit on covering your painting in medium at the end. Do you varnish at all?
It's a really good question, because acrylic paint is at one time used to paint your house with oil paint. Now almost all of it is 100% acrylic. Acrylic is really tough, and you do not need to varnish it. But I still do varnish on occasion. And I'll do it if the layer of paint is very thin, and I do it for abrasion resistance, so that it's like a protective from being abraded off. I'll do it, and that's especially important if you've done this beautiful even blend that's graduating, and covering that is a really good idea with a varnish, because if it gets scratched, it's darn hard to mix right. And match. Because one of the worst things about acrylic, or the only bad thing about acrylics, is that they dry darker. So matching that. And one of the other things, when you look at the different pigments, you'll see ultramarine blue is very matte, whereas phthalo blue is very glossy. So sometimes in a painting, you can have glossy areas, matte areas. So sometimes I'll just even out the gloss through the canvas. And But people that do it for, you know, they buy UV protective. Oh, and when I do varnish, I only use acrylic as a varnish. Don't use any of the other varnishes. Nothing is as tough as acrylic, and it will not yellow. Acrylic is the best quality plastic there is. All the others will yellow over time.
Right.
So the product that I use most often is TriArt Final Finish, and it just has a little bit of hardener in it, so it's just a little less tacky when it's dry.
Nice. And do you
But
like a
I would say
glossy
maybe
or a matte finish usually?
I've done everything from a super high gloss to a matte, but generally I use semi-gloss. There's gloss makes the colors look a little bit richer, matte reduces glare. And so a semi-gloss is just sort of halfway in between. It keeps the
Best of
colors
both
rich,
worlds.
but acrylics generally, yeah. Well, it's the least of both worlds and the best of both worlds.
Um, that's great. That was all the questions that are in our chat here. I'm going to take us on a walk around the gallery. And if you have any comments or any stories to share about any of the paintings, Peter, feel free to kind of chime in and talk about them to everyone. And if anyone has any final questions, feel free to put them into the chat box there. So I will walk over here. I'll give you guys the experience of walking in the front doors of the gallery. So like I said, it really feels like going on vacation here. There's so many beautiful outdoor scenes.
All these ones that you see of Shield Rock, most of those are from a trip that a buddy and I went where we cut across Georgian Bay, hopping island to island to the North Channel, and we were looking for Killarney, and we're both looking out one side of the boat because we were expecting it to be there, and we went right by it because it was on the line behind us. Most of these scenes that you're coming to now are just local ponds. That an awful lot of this is just catching the light at the right time, being in a place at the right day. And quite often the trees you see aren't necessarily what the sky from that day is. I'm always taking pictures of skies because you just never know. Like, I mean, I've got pictures of sky with wires and factories in the background. It's, but
so you can
that was a local
add
mill
in some
pond.
different colors into the sky if you want to. Liven a painting up.
But that's as you get more comfortable with colors, you can switch. I mean, a lot of times people look at the photograph and look at the painting and think, hey, he must be part blind. But it's you just pick and choose what you're going to use. But it is very important to use reference. And one of the reasons I like to use photos is the lighting. Like, I mean, that sky existed for maybe 3-4 minutes tops.
Yeah, this
And
is
even then, over that 3-4 minutes, it would have changed.
That's beautiful. Someone asks what size and thickness of canvas are you using? So these are all on the gallery depth, like 1.5-inch canvases, I believe. Is that correct, Peter?
And the main reason I do it, yes, the main reason I use gallery depth is it helps avoid warping. It doesn't happen on the small ones, but some of the big ones, there's nothing worse than having a canvas. I think that's probably a 60 by 30. I do like to paint large, so I'll paint up to, I guess the largest I've done is around 15 feet, but generally I paint in the 6 to 7 foot width by either 30 inches, 24, 40. So it's, you're just looking for canvases.
Absolutely.
12 by 12s are often ones done in a class that are just demo paintings. They're also a great place to try out different ideas or messing with the colors. This is a north of Superior that a buddy of mine and myself went up photographing. And so we were up at the crack of dawn and there for the sunset, because you never know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
As far as this is actually a sunrise.
This
And
is a gorgeous
sometimes it's
painting.
disappointing.
My webcam camera is not doing it justice, but there are these warm pinks and oranges across the skyline. It's beautiful. And then this one,
This one is also
takes us to some different shores.
it's actually the same shore, just a different day. And a little bit, I think it's a little bit down the way, but it is Superior. And I love waves, and it's the number of time I've been to the ocean and we've had perfectly fine, smooth weather, and it's quite disappointing.
That looks like Catherine Cove to me.
Sorry, Nate, say the cove again.
Catherine Cove.
Don't think so, but
She just meant it reminded her of the work of
you
someone.
I would say it was Catherine Cove. This is actually Trout Lake.
Oh.
A friend of mine runs courses, and that's actually the view from the cottage where I teach. It's a great place to teach because you're right there at the water. And so quite often I'm teaching, looking out the window and saying, okay, break. And we'll go out and take pictures of what's happening out there. That was a great day because there was a storm moving in. And I have done paintings of us ripping along in the boat trying to stay ahead of the storm.
There's one question, do you paint plein air?
On occasion, but not willingly. I like to capture the light. And when I do plein air, I always take my iPad along and take a picture of the scene. Because quite often when you're painting, even if you're really fast, you're not painting from life anymore. You're painting something from memory. Or so I'd much rather take a lot of shots than time. And it's also so much more comfortable in the studio. You're not swatting away. In Scotland, Bonnie and I were on a plein air painting trip, and I set up very carefully by this stream, and it was a beautiful old bridge, and I got everything set up. And as soon as I get the paint on, stinging gnats come out, and I'm sweeping at my head, getting these gnats. And people are walking along the path, and they seem quite interested. But really what they were wondering is, why is this old fart got blue all through his hair? Because as I picked up some phthalo blue and was sweeping it through my hair as I'm swishing away. And so I rejoined the group for lunch, and all of a sudden everyone's taking my picture. And so I start posing and wonder, and of course they eventually find out that phthalo blue is all through my hair, and the color of my hair really shows phthalo blue off nicely.
That's funny. It does come
so
with
no, I'm not a huge fan of plein air. Yes.
That's great, Peter. Well, thank you so much for talking with us tonight. Yeah, there's some thank yous in the chats from folks as well. Thank you for sharing your time with us and your information. And again, if there's anyone who was here looking for some technical expertise, you can grab one of Peter's books here in the gallery. And I would really encourage you to come and take a look at the work in person. My webcam camera cannot do the color justice, and there are a couple more paintings like in the windows that we didn't see on today's tour. So thank you again, Peter, so much. We appreciate it. And thank you everyone who joined us.
Thank you.
Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.